Welcome to the Leaderonomics Show. Today I'll be speaking to David Frigstad, Chairman of Frost Sullivan. David's very interesting because many years ago he set up a market research intelligence company which grew, and ultimately he acquired Frost Sullivan, the leading market research institute in the world. David is known for innovation and disruption, and today on the Leaderonomics Show we'll be exploring leadership and disruption with David Frigstad. So join me now as we have this conversation with David Frigstad. Welcome to the Leaderonomics Show. I'm with David Frigstad, Chairman of Frost Sullivan. David, welcome to the show.
Yeah.
Glad to have you here with us.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
You know, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get to become Chairman of Frost Sullivan?
Kind of an accident, I guess. But
well, I wish that would be an accident. It happened to me. But
no, I was raised in the Midwest, the United States, and went to school on a gymnastics scholarship.
Really?
And I was, yes.
That's why you're so flexible. Huh?
Actually, yeah, I'm still working on it with yoga. But when I was in college, I met some very dynamic people, both the professors that were encouraging something very rare at the time, which was entrepreneurship. We didn't even call things entrepreneurship then. But we both, the partner and I, got excited about that and started a research company called Market Intelligence. And after we got that started after school, we decided to first set up in Silicon Valley because we thought that's where the action was, which was, I think, a good fortuitous move. And as the company grew, we eventually acquired the brand and the company that we call ourselves now, which is Frost Sullivan. And so we've been building up the company ever since that.
Oh, so you kind of founded Frost Sullivan to some extent.
That's the word. And my title is kind of founded.
Kind of founded.
Because Frost Sullivan is actually was originally founded in 1961 in New York. Okay. And then we acquired it, and we liked the brand name because it was really known for pioneering emerging research, which was kind of the new technology opportunities and new geographic opportunities. And that's really where the brand got built. And I was always very inspired and kind of proud of what the brand represented to governments, investors, and the innovators on the planet.
So what do you do as chairman?
You know, I ask myself that every day because, you know, as a chairman, I always tell people my hand is on the rudder. You know, I'm not an engine, I'm not the infrastructure, but I try and guide the company to make sure we go through what I find to be very difficult times right now because, you know, like publishing, like news, like so many other industries, it's getting totally disrupted. And we have to make sure we have a more powerful vision, a better value proposition, and a better relationship with our clients based on the megatrends that are happening that we not only survive the future, but of course we want to thrive as well.
You speak about disruption. What sort of disruption are you going through, and how does one overcome these disruptions in general?
You know, I think it's, what I always tell my clients is you got to watch out for the Kodak moment. And the Kodak moment is when you're really spending more time defending your incumbent market position that you lose any reality that there's other threats to your business, whether it's a new business model or new technology. And you know, Kodak got smashed by both social media as well as, you know, new business models, as well as, you know, they ignored the digital Moore's Law. Yep. And I remember in the 1980s, the Kodak team would say, nobody will ever replace film. And I heard that over and over and over again. And it's really a function of math, that math was ultimately going to kill film, which it did. So the same thing's now happening in my industry. There's a mega trend I call good enough, meaning you get so much data on the internet that CEOs are saying, we have enough to take a decision, which is really tough when you're an information provider and an industry watcher. There's other mega trends like innovation to free, where there's You know, there's constantly, every year it gets cheaper, bill rates go down. You have to have more utilization. Every CEO of every consulting company will whine about that when we have beer together. And there's a number of other megatrends going on, like collaboration. We also find that CEOs don't read anymore. I'm not even sure if they can read. But you know, the reality is we have to shift from what I would call a reading experience, where people don't really learn much from learning, to an experiential experience of change and learning, where it's not one person, but you're taking a whole team through the experience of change. And you know, we're figuring that out now, and I think it's a fundamental part of us surviving the disruption that's going through the kind of the information consulting business services sector right now.
So how do you survive? I mean, if you're a CEO and you're getting disrupted, right? What are some steps we can take to avoid being disrupted, or should we be the one being the disruptor?
Bunch of advice, because that's really where we focus with our clients. One is the very, very importance of investing in the future. And when I talk to CEOs around the world, and when we do CEO surveys, we spend a lot of time benchmarking how they're looking at the future. So we have 10 best practices where we diagnose clients on, are they investing in the future? Because most CEOs will say two things. One, I'm an industry visionary, which is 90% of the time not true. Okay. And they also say everything's operating at best practices, which is also not true. So when we talk to them about how they see the future, what's going to disrupt their company, what might give them the Kodak moment, I usually get a dial tone. They don't know. And if you haven't thought what's going to put you out of business, you're not going to be ready for it. So we ask clients to spend more time creating visionary scenarios, from the worst case of, I'm going to go bankrupt because of this, all the way to the best case where my company's going to go viral and everybody's going to love me. You know, yesterday at the Megatrends event, you know, I was talking to, you know, a $5 billion hotel chain, and the CEO had never heard of kind of the new business sharing model, Airbnb. Yep, Airbnb. And I was shocked. And you know, the vision was all about how many employees we're going to have in the next 10 years, which is totally not a vision that inspires talent. Because he also said, my big goal is to, you know, talent attraction. Well, if you go out to young MBAs and say, our vision is twice as many employees, that doesn't excite anybody. So, you know, to avoid these disruptions, I think first you got to look at the convergence of megatrends, new business models, which are really disruptive, and disruptive technology. And you have to start to see how that convergence is going to impact your company, your industry, and your career. Okay. And it's incredibly complex, and it takes a lot of time, and CEOs aren't putting the time in. Okay,
hold that thought, David, and we'll be right back after the break here on the Leaderonomics Show. Welcome back to the Leaderonomics Show. I'm speaking to David Frigstad, Chairman of Frost Sullivan. David, we were talking about disruption, and one of the biggest disruptors to the world is Silicon Valley. And you're kind of living in Silicon Valley to some extent. What's so special about Silicon Valley? I mean, why does Silicon Valley get to disrupt so much? Is there a secret to their success?
I think there's a couple unique things that we found, because there's all the obvious things like capital, good education, I think relatively a good government infrastructure. I think one of the things that's unique about it is first a celebration of failure. Okay. So around the world, if you fail at a business, usually you're blocked from doing more business for quite a while. In Silicon Valley, we have a new title called serial entrepreneur, which means multiple time failure. And they're proud of it. And I think it's a unique aspect of the culture.
So that's what serial entrepreneur means?
In my eyes.
A failure that calls himself a...
Exactly. And the venture capitalists actually admire that.
That's a badge of honor, right, almost?
It is, because you know the pain of failure and you know how valuable that capital is. So I think that's something unique. Something that came up in a panel discussion I was heading a couple months ago, and that was that Silicon Valley is somewhat unique in the tolerating dysfunctional characters. People that wouldn't fit into a normal organization sometimes make a great entrepreneur. And I think there's a little bit more tolerance or flexibility to leaders that don't fit the standard mold.
But why is that? I mean, how does Silicon Valley tolerate these guys, and why can't other parts of the world do that?
You know, I think it's all about fitting in. So when you go to Europe or Asia, there's tremendous pressure to fit into the group, to conform, that we all wear suits, that we all do this. And somebody that goes against those norms or styles is someone that needs to do the same thing in the business context. Find those unmet customer needs that nobody else sees. Or, you know, I was always impressed, and still am, with Steve Jobs, and even something simple like changing the color of a computer, which he was the first one to make a black computer, first one to make a gumdrop computer. It sounds simple, but why didn't the other 600 companies think of that? Yeah. And he always went against. So you're looking for that kind of person.
Almost
that
heretical behavior. That
Totally, exactly. But you can't have, first you can't listen to everybody who says no or won't work. And then you kind of have to go against the grain, which all of these, you know, quite a few of the people that are done really well have gone straight up against the grain.
You know, you talk about failure being a badge and very important, and you also talk about experiential learning. I mean, I assume that failure, learning from the failure is critical for success, right? I mean, essentially. But how does one, you know, when one fails, right, it's very hard to pick yourself up and get up and especially here in Asia, we tend to ostracize failure, right? So how does one do that? I mean, you know, consistently and still know at the end of the day you're going to win the game, you know?
Well, you know, there's a couple things. One is the whole venture capital community, which drives Silicon Valley, is far more, not famous, but they're actually famous for their few wins. Yeah. But 80–90% of the time they're failing. You know, I think it's 19 out of 21 investments fail. And you have to have that set into your mindset. So if you ostracize everybody that failed, there wouldn't be any new things. I think the other thing they do quite well is they take the risk out of the equation, because when the venture companies back you, you have a salary from day one. Yep. It's not a big salary, but you're not betting your house. And it's, you know, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, if you were an entrepreneur, when I started Frost Sullivan, didn't take a salary for 10 years. You know, slept next to my desk for more years than I'm proud of. As we struggled through all the mistakes, because, you know, we started it with $100 of capital. Now the venture guys are much more aggressive. You know, there's a lot of angel investing. So if you have a pretty good idea, you're going to get funding now where you couldn't before.
Let's talk about CEOs. I mean, what are some of the flaws you think the CEOs of today are committing? And what should they do differently? You know?
I think the biggest one is that CEOs don't invest in the future. And I think the world is the convergence going on in the world right now between megatrends, new business models, disruptive technologies. It's really accelerating change. It's increasing risk. And if you're not investing in the future, you have a huge chance
what does investing in the future mean? I mean, because every CEO will say they're investing for the future. You know? I'm investing in my people and I'm investing for the future. Right?
And they'll also say they're visionaries.
Yes.
But what we see is that 1 out of 100 companies are actually getting the team together talking about a 10-year, 20-year future. They're actually having meetings and strategy sessions every week talking about not the current product lines where they'll be in 10 years, but totally new business models, new customer experiences. How are they going to survive these things? Even something like eating your own children, which I think is a great concept.
Eating your own children. Oh, okay.
It's a great concept because, you know, if you have a landline telecom company, you're going to have, that child will probably get eaten by mobile. So you might as well start to eat your own child rather than letting somebody else do it.
Okay.
You know, Walmart might have seen that when they started Walmart.com, is you got to start, and it's a very dangerous value proposition because they have all those big box stores. So the idea is to kill off, because chances are the product line you have today will probably not be here in 10 years.
Okay. But those require being brave, taking risk, things that generally is not something infrastructurally we have here in Asia, or I don't know in the US. I mean, you know.
I think it's a global issue.
Yeah.
You know, even in the 1960s, there were 600 companies that made vacuum tubes. None of those companies survived the shift to transistors. And I think it's a human phenomenon of resistance to change, and you see the same thing today with a little bit in the automotive industry, you see it in healthcare, you see it in education, that the CEOs are spending more time resisting change than accepting change. And that I don't think it's bravery as much as investing the time to figure out what the future is going to look like. I think that's the missing element. They don't know.
And innovation, you know, is a buzzword, and every CEO puts in a chief innovation officer and kind of, you know, take care of innovation. How does one company really become innovative and successful?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the chief innovation officer, because every company right now is hiring a chief innovation officer, and that's our solution to innovation. And I think that'll fail in a big way because it's not integrating the megatrends that make great leadership today. To really be innovative, it's a culture that goes from the top to the bottom, right? Usually you collect all your senior management team and you have a strategy session, and usually it's a one-year plan. That all has to change. It has to integrate your entire global organization, different people from different segments. It has to be a lot more collaborative in nature, and it has to be much more what I call experiential learning, meaning we're all going to go through this process together, and when we're done, we'll be aligned on the vision and the ideas of where we're going to go forward. And for the most part, that hardly ever happens in any company on the planet. I don't see any great difference between Asian companies and other ones.
Let's talk about leadership. I mean, you went through, like you said, you know, sleepless nights and no salary. I mean, you went through a pain of becoming a leader. What's your take on leadership, and how do we develop more leaders that can be successful in this new era?
You know, I think the old leaders, when I kind of grew up, was very much command and control, and I know everything, and that's why I've become the CEO. And you know, and when you've been in the job, you realize that's not true, never will be true. Yep. What I see now that's missing in leadership is more of a mind-body-soul connection. People have to lead more with their heart and a little less with the command and control. Not only does that inspire people more, but people don't like the command and control structure, and it's such a battle to hang on to your talent that if you're not connecting them on a deeper level, one based on significance, one based on, you know, the value you bring to the world, and the kind of the gratitude you'd feel by being on the right team. I think that's an incredible part of leadership now that we'll start to see develop in the future leaders.
And you see that happening? More and more of these type of leaders are mushrooming?
Absolutely, because, you know, programs like yours is pulling out the leaders that are successful, and when you meet these people, they are leading more with their heart, they're making their company be more significant in terms of bringing value to everybody on the planet. It's not just about next quarter's margin.
Okay. You know, quick question: if somebody wants to become like you know, I want to one day be.
You say like me?
Yeah, one day want to become a
I
chairman
would
of a
recommend
company.
that. Yeah.
You wouldn't recommend it? You know, if somebody aspires to build a company like you did and grow it and ultimately run it as chairman, what advice would you give somebody just coming out of school? You know, what you know, couple of wisdom, you know, pieces of nuggets of wisdom you would impart to them?
I think first you got to be very careful for what you wish for, because I think for the most part, you know, leadership roles, the CEO, chairman, is very time consuming. It gives you a lot of stress. You have a very kind of unhealthy schedule of too much travel. It's not for everybody, but for the most part, you got to watch out for what you wish for. I think the other thing is you know, you're going to be working with people, and you know, understanding people and psychology and how, you know, what people are looking for in life, and integrating that into your leadership style is incredibly important. The job keeps getting tougher all the time, and I think as you develop those skills, if that's what you want, being connected to people, being connected to bigger issues, I think is really important.
How do you develop those things? I mean, how do you develop big picture thinking and being connected to people? And
You know, I think it's actually a set of tools. You know, sometimes people say, you know, born visionary or, you know, born charismatic leader. Maybe, I haven't seen it. I think those are all developed skills that you go through training on, and you get a lot more. What we see around the world now is coaching and mentoring are much, much bigger elements of the feedback learning system for CEOs or management teams than they ever have before. It's much more like an athletic endeavor than it is a numbers endeavor, and I think that's a big change in business.
Final question: what advice would you impart to a CEO, if you could, if you were given an opportunity to?
You know, the advice I always give is, you know, we spend a lot of time trying to diagnose: are you ready for the future? Because the disruption's literally coming to every industry, every company, and are they ready for that? And really saying, you know, spend at least 2% of your time, 1 week a year, looking at things like an open ecosystem, serendipitous connections, figuring out those scenarios from the Kodak moment all the way to going viral, and getting you and your team to really spend more time on that.
So it's really asking questions all the time and being curious.
That's
essentially. Well, thank you so much for being here on the show. I've been speaking to David Frigstad, Chairman of Frost & Sullivan. David, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you. Great pleasure.